The Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, everyone. You've tuned in at the right time, in the right place for tonight's Kev Baker Show, right here on Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. Hope you're all ready for another amazing 2 hours of radio tonight. And I don't say that because I've got a big ego. I say that because I've got Dr. Eric Karlstrom with me tonight. And we're going to be continuing our groundbreaking series into the world of what is commonly referred to as gang stalking, mind control, and everything that goes with it. Now, before I bring the doc onto the show, let me just mention something that I failed to bring up on the show last night. And that was, of course, the unfortunate and untimely passing of a fellow radio host, a legend in the business, Mr. Art Bell. Now, it's thanks to Art Bell that people like me can take up the microphone and talk about the topics that we do. And I would be lying to say that I was a regular listener to Art back in the day or anything like that, but I've heard the famous clips. I'm sure we've all heard them out there. If you hadn't heard of Art before, it's all over YouTube and tributes to him being paid right now. So from the Kev Baker Show and myself, I want to pay respects to Art Bell, and I'm sure all of you out there would like to do the same. So if anyone is in contact with Art's family or anyone happens to be listening in tonight, all the best to yous. So then, with that out of the way, let me bring in tonight's guest. And like I say, we've got Dr. Eric Karlstrom with me. And we may have new listeners because I appreciate with such a global audience. And, you know, as these shows progress, and I think we've done over 12 or 13 now, you know, more and more people who have an invested interest in the subject that we're going to talk about tonight, they become aware of the show. So regular listeners, you'll be used to the doc. Get your pens and papers ready. It's going to be another good one. Dr. Eric Karlstrom, Professor of Geography, California State University, Stanislaus, recently completed a 30-year teaching career. Now, he taught physical and environmental geography courses, as well as courses cross-listed with the geology department and an honours course. Throughout his career, Dr. Karlstrom has continued his research program in soils and geomorphology as a means of reconstructing quaternary paleoclimates. He is also the author or co-author of many earth science publications. And of course, he is, in my opinion, one of the leading researchers and somebody who brings together the research of others on all of the topics we're going to get into tonight. And Doc, just before we get going, I think you might need to turn your speakers down just a little bit of feedback coming in there.
Okay, I'll see if I can master that technology here.
You certainly sound loud. That's fine, Doc. That seems to have cleared it up, but you sound loud and clear, and I'm sure we won't be talking at the same time, so it's not going to be a problem. Welcome back, Doc. Here we go. And isn't it typical? We didn't have that echo going on before the show, or I could have sorted it out for you then.
Are we good now, Kev? As the echo down?
We're good, Doc. We're good.
Very good. Well, it's good to be with you again, Kev. As you say, we've done quite a few shows on the topic that we're going to address tonight. And I think we're making progress. We're learning more and more all the time about a very, very dark and evil global program, which many people find themselves enrolled in involuntarily. I've gotten to know more and more, over the past several years when I became aware that I was enrolled in this program. I guess we can loosely call it gang stalking or counterintelligence stalking. I've got some better acronyms, I believe. So let me throw those out right now. I think gang stalking is not very descriptive, nor is targeted individual, although target at least conveys the idea that, well, this is a military program. They're trying to kill somebody. That I think maybe is accurate. But instead of gang stalking nowadays, I like to use these two acronyms. One, GOG'S, New Gestapo, and that actually spells out, it's an acronym for Global Organized Gang Stalking Neuro Warfare Groups, Electronic Surveillance, Slavery, Tracking, Targeting, Torture, and PSYOPs operation. GOG's New Gestapo also has the advantage of it having in the term two concepts. One, GOG is kind of the biblical term for the Antichrist system. And Gestapo, of course.
Just to interrupt you there, I mean, I think this is really relevant for people. And we discussed it before the show. And GOG's is very, very good term to use, a very good acronym, because we were discussing how it doesn't matter what people's mindsets or beliefs are. We have to know the enemy in this case. And they are a dark, satanic, occult group. Isn't that right?
Yes, very much so. And yeah, so actually, you know, if you put the two terms together, GOG and Gestapo being the draconian security state police of the Nazis, you can come up with another descriptive word, Zio-Nazi, because we're really dealing here with a, well, I think this is perhaps the best term for the people that are behind the global push for global control, sometimes called the New World Order. And there's so much research that points in that direction. I've got a website, 911nwo.com, which has got an enormous number of articles, many of which I've written myself, many of which I've posted from others, and many interviews that, you know, talk about who's behind 9/11 and what the goals are, etc. Then the other website that I think is very pertinent for this evening's conversation is gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com. And this really kind of was a spin-off of my 911nwo.com website. So there's an enormous amount of free information. These are digital libraries really that I make available because I think that, well, this is what retired professors should do on the one hand. And number two, there are so many important issues. Even as we get our civil liberties and our rights stripped away from us, maybe we have to step up with our responsibilities as citizens to try to reclaim those rights and the Constitution in the case of the United States, which made America a great country. But this has been torn up now by the group that is taking control of it, the Fifth Column group, I guess you could say. And it's not too hard to figure out who they are. I've got a segment or a subheading in both of my websites called The Controllers, and must be 20 or 30 or 40 articles on each one, which pretty much detail that. Now, the other part of GOG's New Gestapo is new, N-E-W, and that again is neuro warfare. So we're talking now about very, very high technology stuff that has been called total individual technology, total individual control technology.
And what I like about working with you, Doc, and all of your acronyms and the topics we cover is it almost fits like a jigsaw with some of the other guests and some of the other topics that I talk about. So we really are, it's just adding to an even broader picture that we're painting for the audience. And, you've got another acronym you're going to be getting in tonight from a new article you've been putting together. And this is brilliant, so apt. TECC, that's Tango Echo Charlie Charlie, the Electronic Concentration Camp. Never has there been a more apt acronym.
Yeah, our brilliant leaders, who have capitalized on, at least 100 years of research from some very bright scientists, et cetera, have figured out, they don't have to send us to the concentration camps. They don't have to send us to Gitmo or Abu Ghraib. They have the technology now to bring the technology to us as individuals. They can do their programs of ISR, isolate and remove, to deprive and degrade all aspects of a targeted individual's life using electronics and a whole network of street thugs that we'll talk about, a syndicate kind of operation, which is really the topic of our discussion tonight. I've got this new article that I just sent you, Kev, and I refer to the listeners to it. It's on my gang stalking mindcontrolcults.com website under gang stalking, which is the heading on the left, and it's called Precursors, Structure, and Components of Corporate, Government, Military, Intelligences, GOG'S, New Gestapo / TECC, TECC, the electronic concentration camp. Qui Bono, who benefits? Well, this is my latest attempt to try to figure this out. Now, as I've said, I have known I'm a target in this program, and it's not a pretty thing to be a target in this program. It really amounts to no-touch torture and slow kill with very high technology. Not everybody's in the same kinds of programs, but there's so many, probably millions in the world right now that are being targeted. And for us, self-defense really requires we understand something about the program. No one sends you a letter and says, okay, now we're going to target you with these very high-tech, total individual control technologies. You have to figure it out. And so we've been working on that, and with the help of the internet and reading books and hearing others who are dealing with these kinds of issues. Some targets have been targeted, they say, for 40, 45 years. So this is not a new program, although it's radically ramped up after 9/11. And so we're trying to understand what are the precursors, what is the structure, and what are the components of this system, and who benefits from it. And so I guess we can launch in. Kev, do you have a comment right there?
No, I'm just ready for you to launch into this, Doc. And I mean, for people out there, you mentioned there's probably millions targeted. And this is something I've thought about in between our last show and tonight. And there's a good likelihood, if not now, then in the near future, we're all probably going to know somebody who's under some form of what we're going to talk to tonight. And it's so discreet and it can be so subtle that maybe right now we know somebody and we would be none the wiser. Because it doesn't come with flashing lights on this, folks. You can't just automatically say, oh, look, that person's been targeted. It is so clever, this program that they've put together, and in fact, so evil that it becomes deniable. And for listeners, I'm not going to keep going over stuff we've listened to before. Anyone who hasn't heard the previous shows, you can get them all over on the Kev Baker Show on YouTube. I would prefer you even to get them here on tfrlive.com. So, Doc, I'll let you get into this article now, and I would say I won't interrupt, but I will, and that's how we like to have a conversation about it.
I appreciate it. Actually, it is much better if we have a back and forth on this thing. Yeah, it's, as I say, it's not a new program. It has been evolving over the decades. And we're learning bits and pieces about how it functions, who uses it. Obviously, what's being used is very, very high technology in mind control and in non-lethal weapons, quote unquote. Of course, they can be tuned up and scaled up to be lethal, that have been developed by military and intelligence in the United States, Britain, Israel, Russia, over, since World War II. And now these very high-tech weapons can be, they have weaponized the entire electromagnetic spectrum, as we've seen before in some of our talks. All of the energy wavelengths and frequencies can be used in certain ways, and they've figured out how to, change people's moods, to create anger and anxiety and every emotion. Figured out how to stop people's hearts, cause cancer, induce various kinds of illnesses. This can be done electromagnetically. So when we talk about the electromagnetic spectrum, we're talking about something that's actually fairly mysterious. Energy perpetuates through space, in a wave form and in a photon form or a point form.
Oh, now you're talking my language, Doc. They don't call me the quantum mechanic for nothing.
Yeah, and so we have, and of course, we've learned about this over the last 150 years or so. And what we perceive really is a fairly small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We see visible light. All the colors of the rainbow have different wavelengths between 0.4 and 0.7 angstroms. An angstrom is a millionth of a meter. So imagine the distance between the peak and a peak and a trough of a wave form, peak to peak distance of, less than 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And that's how, small these wavelengths are that we perceive as visible light. But then you go to much, much longer wavelengths like radio waves and microwaves, et cetera, which can be, some of them kilometers long. And then much, much shorter wavelengths, which gamma rays, et cetera.
And this is where the 5G comes in as well, Doc, because that goes down to the millimeter wave.
Well, yeah, the millimeter wave would be actually longer than the visible light. But yeah, so get yourself a little chart of the electromagnetic spectrum and take a look at all the different wavelengths. And again, each one has its kind of range of what it will do. And of course, physicists are well versed in this, and military type physicists have figured out how to use these things. For instance, in HAARP, the High Active Frequency Auroral Research Program, which was a 90s project of the military and corporations, which can be used then to bounce extremely low frequency radiation off of the ionosphere, which is high in the sky, 50 to 100 miles up, and then bring it down with pinpoint accuracy to any point on the Earth. And adding energy there can, for instance, move a storm or create an earthquake, or can also be used to change the moods of a population, for instance. So the whole business of weather control and mind control actually are related, and the HAARP and the other 20-some ionospheric heaters in the world can accomplish these things. So anyway, I've digressed a little bit. But this is all in the background. The background is very high-tech capabilities that the military has developed. And now we need to understand something about that to understand this concept of total individual control technology, V2K, voice to skull, microwave hearing, synthetic telepathy has been used, called Manchurian channelers.
Well, Doc, you mentioned the voice to skull there. And this is quite interesting. There's a new technology out, or it's coming out on the market. Google have been working on this, and they call this the alter ego. Now, what this claims to be able to do is it listens to our thoughts. That little voice in our head when we're thinking away, we'll be able to use that to change the channel on Netflix, to surf the net. And when they get into explaining it, I've covered this on the show before, it causes basically muscular twitches, and it's able to read through the jawline this internal voice. Now, we were saying, well, if they can do that with a contraption that's wired along your jawline, then if you flip that round, this is the same way that they're probably able to manipulate voices into people's heads.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
so
and
now,
of course,
we're seeing this. We're almost seeing the military-industrial complex now finding a commercial use for the stuff they've been using for years.
Right. And, and this always is the way of it, Kev. I mean, the military is always 50 years ahead of us. And then, they develop the high tech, and then it bleeds out into the commercial sector later. And many of these technologies can be used for very positive purposes. But of course, in the way of things, all these breakthroughs are usually accomplished by militaries, and they're used for destructive purposes first. So yeah, what you're talking about sounds a little bit like brain to computer interface. And there's another kind, it's called brain to brain interface. These technologies are now in the hands of course, the NSA and the CIA and the FBI and their private subcontractors. And the capabilities of these of these individuals within these institutions is to actually be able to invade the mind of John Q. Public was walking down the street while he's walking down the street and insert thoughts, which he often can't distinguish from his own, generally can't, or images or voices, the voice to skull. This technology is actually quite old, certainly 70s, and has been refined since then. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that the technology is only being used by these governmental and private institutions. I think it may also be being used by rogue agencies like mafias, etc. So we're in a very grim place right now. People don't understand what can be done. People who are maybe enrolled in this program, maybe they've been put on a terrorist watch list, and red flagged by Department of Homeland Security Fusion Center or a Joint Terrorism Task Force of the FBI. And now all of a sudden their life is going south fast. They're hearing voices in their heads. People are following them around. Everybody looks mean. Everything's going wrong. They go to a store to try to buy something and people scowl at them, or they go to get their car fixed and the people at the auto mechanics place, make it worse and then charge them money. I mean, these are all things that happen in a protocol that we can call gang stalking. And we've talked about that. We've talked about the manual for gang stalking, which I believe comes out of CIA torture manual called the Kubark manual, which again is based on the mind control experiments of the CIA, the MK Ultra, Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Naomi, many top secret projects starting right after World War II. Every kind of manipulation so that the CIA or whoever is in control could remotely control the behavior of another human being without that human being knowing it. And this is where we are now with Jason Bourne kinds of super soldiers. I'm sure we have many people that are controlled remotely. We're talking now about kind of turning humans into biological robots. And this has been accomplished with the Manchurian candidates, certainly since the 60s and 50s and even 40s. If you read George Estabrook's work on hypnosis, he could make a Manchurian candidate or an assassin in the 40s through hypnotically inducing multiple personality and then triggering one personality to do the dirty work and then triggering back into the other personality who doesn't remember it. This capability was in the 40s. And of course the CIA and the Russians then had this gigantic war all through the Cold War to try to develop these psychotronic or mind control techniques best and most, figuring that this really was the future of warfare, not atomic weapons, because that wrecks everything. It blows everybody up. That kills everybody. But with this, they could selectively psycho-civilize the population. So we start to look at the background of this, and we see there's a lot of precursors. And we can piece together what's happening now by looking at these old programs. And before I get into that, let me just give a couple quotes here, okay? Kev, let's hear what Cushman Cunningham says in Conspiracy Facts, Neocons Unmasked. Of course, they gave us 9/11 and all these wars in the Middle East. They scripted him in their Project for New American Century document of 2000, Rebuilding America's Defenses, calling for 9/11. He says, national security is the largest institution in the world and also the most corrupt institution in the world in the sheer volume of plunder of America's financial assets. Well, he's absolutely right. We have national security establishment. We have the national security enterprise. Enormous funds, billions and even trillions are going into this fraudulent endeavor, because it's fraudulent because 9/11 was carried out by Israel and the United States, and the war on terror is also a fraud. Because they're the terrorists. The terrorists are in Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv, etc. Here's a rare confession from an ex-CIA whistleblower. He says, the FBI is spearheading the most colossal and evil attacks on people ever conceived on the face of the earth. And they are using deep space-based technology, biochemical, viral warfare elements and agents, and psychological warfare to destroy people. This is unprecedented in human affairs. There is no due process. Now, bear in mind, somebody goes into the FBI, he wants to, usually he wants to be the good guy, right? So,
wow,
a lot of people.
That is one hell of a quote there, Doc.
Well, let me keep going.
We're right on the break. We'll get more of these on the other side. Dr. Eric Karlstrom. Be right back.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back to tonight's Kev Baker Show. I'm your host, Kev Baker, and tonight we're joined by Dr. Eric Karlstrom. Now, you can find the doc's websites over at 911nwo.com or gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com. That's gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com. And I think to start this part of the show, I'm just going to reiterate and go over the quote that the doc finished up on before the break, because I think this is very important. And the source that it comes from makes it very profound indeed. Because I know there's people out there may question the stuff myself and the doc go into. They may even question gang stalking on the whole. And I used to be there. It's okay. Remember what we were saying last night? It's okay to say I was wrong. And if I'd heard this quote right back at the start, I think this would have opened my eyes a heck of a lot earlier. And it goes like this. The FBI is spearheading the most colossal and evil attacks on people ever conceived on the face of the earth. And they are using deep space-based technology, biochemical viral warfare elements and agents, and psychological warfare to destroy people. This is unprecedented in human affairs. There is no due process. No one is ever told why he or she has been attacked. It's a secret program. They don't want to have to explain what they're doing. And that comes from Gerald Sosby, an ex-FBI whistleblower. He's also a lawyer and a judge, and he happens to be a targeted individual. Now, I hadn't heard that before, Doc, and that is some quote right there. And what you do is you take all of the various people who speak, all the people who write on this, and you provide an invaluable service by putting it all together in articles that people can look through and really connect the dots.
Yeah, thanks, Kev. Well, this comes from an interview that Gerald Sosby, the ex-FBI whistleblower, did with Romola D just within the last week or so. And I've got it posted on my website, along with, a few of the statements that he made, which are very powerful coming from an ex-FBI guy. He also says the FBI has control over every agency in government. The CIA has total access to everything. They are the secret government. The FBI and the CIA are like governments unto themselves. They are sovereign states. Our government is not only doing this to its own citizens, they are doing it to other citizens around the world. The United States is making a lot of enemies. Ordinary people everywhere see what these evil intelligence agencies are doing. The FBI, CIA, NSA, NSC, DOD, Department of Defense. That's not good for our own national security. Now, that's an interesting point that I hadn't thought about before. They always use that, well, this is national security, ma'am. This is classified. We can't tell you. We would like you to help us investigate this, or terrorize your neighbor who we have him under suspicion for being whatever, and so now your neighbor is turned against you, and this is the excuse is, well, this is national security, man. But by doing this program, they are actually threatening national security as the rest of the world looks back and says, what is America doing?
And Doc, I think this is why it's really good that you call it GOG'S new Gestapo. Because when you say Gestapo, our minds automatically think to jackbooted kind of frog marching, the Nazis and black uniforms and everything that goes with that. And it is the same thing, only this time they're hiding behind technology. They don't have the uniforms on. And it was only after the invasion of Germany and the fall of the Nazis that the German people really realized what was going on there. And I've said this of my country, people are so asleep at times. I've joked about maybe Russia coming in and sorting things out. And only then people would wake up when they're actually showing that these agencies, these government bodies, be it in America or over here, they're not here to help us. They're actually enslaving and oppressing us.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is the case. And, well, you know, I did a little research on the Nazis' Gestapo, and I put this, under precursors, I'm talking about, you know, what came before to explain what's happening now. And there's a little internet post, and I posted some of it. This police force was like unlike others, in that it answered to no judicial or legal or civilian oversight. As part of the Nazi consolidation of power, all German police forces were combined, well, much like we have now with the Department of Homeland Security. Germany, like many countries in Europe, had a long history of political policing dating back to the imperial period. It used surveillance and coercive tactics against movements and individuals it deemed hostile to the state or posing a threat to the established order. The Gestapo distinguished itself from other police in that it functioned not just as a police force, but as a force inseparable from the Nazi Party, with a mandate to operate outside the law or judicial review to combat legal activity deemed unacceptable to the party. The Gestapo officers targeted mainly political enemies of the Nazis, such as communists, social democrats, liberals, and other targets. Because enemies of the state were so hated, they argued it was necessary to confine them in protective custody, quote unquote, to protect concentration camps, to protect them from the righteous anger of good German citizens. This twisted logic allowed the Gestapo full power to arrest individuals and hold them in concentration camps like Dachau indefinitely without ever charging them or giving them a judicial hearing. Well, this is exactly what's going on with GOG'S new Gestapo. And the old Gestapo would turn neighbor against neighbor, just like the new Gestapo does. So as it turns out, I think the choice of terms was pretty good. It's a replay of the Nazi Gestapo with high tech, with these brain invasive technologies, total individual control technologies. It's not a good state of affairs. We talked last week, Kev, about don't be a perpetrator, and you know there's now a whole infrastructure associated with the national security enterprise in which people are making money stalking and harassing and profiling and surveilling their neighbors, and you know doing little harassment, psychological attacks, you know, tailing their bumpers. All of these SIACs are, you know, considered, well, they're stalking, and they're all felonies. They're all criminal felonies. So they have to be very careful about it, and there's always plausible deniability built into it. But the bottom line is, you know, the Department of Homeland Security, as we pointed out last week, said in 2003, we want 100 million Americans to serve as citizen spies. You know, to protect the homeland from all these bad terrorists out there. You know,
they're hiding. They're hiding around every corner. They're up trees, under park benches over here as well. You know, I barely leave the house. I'm that scared. There's that many terrorists out there. If I believed the news and the government.
Yeah, well, of course, you know the whole thing is just FBI. Setup, because you know the only terrorists that they ever arrested were people that were you know kind of caught in FBI stings, you know, and they were usually Muslims, and of course they want to give the impression that the Muslims did 9/11, etc., so that they can attack all these Muslim countries for India, or not India, Israel, excuse me. We're doing Israel's foreign policy now. Israel was involved in all of these things and is, I think, intimately involved in GOG'S new Gestapo. But yeah, let's look at these precursors. We have many of them since the late 1800s. We've had U.S. police intelligence units called Red Squads, which have infiltrated, subverted, and neutralized unions and other political movements that were considered subversive or dissident. So that goes right back. And then since, you know, 9/11 especially, we poured, you know, billions of dollars into privatizing, making a police industrial complex or a corporate security surveillance state All of this has gone into the creation of GOG'S new Gestapo. There's some good books about this. Balco's Rise of the Warrior Cop, The Militarization of America's Police Force, in 2014, and Priest and Arkin's Top Secret America, The Rise of the New American Security State. So think police, then think military. Okay, and we know war has always been a racket. General Smedley Butler's classic War is a Racket of 1936 spelled it out very simply and succinctly. But the DoD, Department of Defense, has had a revolution in military affairs since the 80s, fighting a new kind of war now with quote-unquote non-lethal weapons, i.e. Tesla technology, in other words, electromagnetic weapons. They call it fourth-generation warfare, silent, soft kill, slow kill, secret. You know, now nobody knows they're being hit until they manifest symptoms, like, for instance, the diplomats in Cuba did just a couple of years ago. That's very much like what TIs are experiencing all over the world. All those symptoms that they experience can be created with ultrasound and that sort of thing, which are, again, are directed energy.
Think of what a sick world we live in. You know, all of these things that the doc ran through there. We can add the chemtrails, the food we eat, stuff like that. We can all basically make a case for us being under some form of slow kill, some form of silent weapon. And yet here we are, victims ourselves. And what happens when the government tells us that dirty, nasty chemicals might have been used over in Syria? There's an outcry to go and bomb people. And here we are, ourselves, victims of a very discreet form of the same kind of attack. There's something darkly ironic and sick about that, Doc.
Oh, indeed. The hypocrisy is beyond imagining, you know, when... Yeah, we think and of course that, you know, probably the alleged event didn't happen, you know, so, you know, we're dealing with lies and spies and setups and dirty tricks. And that's the world that TIs are enrolled in. It's another name is counterintelligence stalking. This is what spies have done to each other for a long time. And now these nasty techniques of personal destruction, covert personal destruction, are being, you know, directed at innocent civilians. So the real terrorists, of course, are not the Arabs. They are the intelligence agencies. They are the people in special ops. And this is, there's just no doubt about this. Let me just continue with the DoD. Their use of course, their fourth generation warfare is the use of non-lethal weapons, directed energy weapons, but they also use a thing called mind war and psychological warfare, information warfare, unconventional warfare. These are all their terms. Irregular warfare, military operations other than war, civil military operations using the private sector, like the Stasi police did in East Germany, and the Department of Homeland Security is doing in America. Network-centric warfare. Okay, what is net-centric warfare? Well, they have this new concept, okay,